Morning all. Magnus Carlsen and Judit Polgar are having fun before the upcoming London Chess Classic, starting this Saturday. In the Second Gran Fiesta UNAM, it took place in the Mexico City venue from the 16th to the 25th of November 2012. It started with a Women's Rapid Championship and an Open. The main attraction was a rapid and blindfold knockout tournament with Magnus Carlsen, Lazaro, Bruzon, Judit Polgar and Manuel Hoyos. And in this, actually, we got to see Magnus Carlsen playing Judit Polgar. Okay, and in the first rapid game, Magnus was playing white. Let's have a look at it. Knight f3. Rapid chess is usually 30-minute or equivalent, for example 20 minutes but with 10-second increments, something like that. So it's usually along that sort of time scale. The exact details I'm not particularly sure from the official websites, but okay. So Judit replies with knight f6, and we see actually after c4 g6, and we end up going into the King's Indian defense here. After e4 d6 d4, we're in a King's Indian defense. Magnus Carlsen facing Judit Polgar's King's Indian. And what does he do? Okay, after castles, he plays h3. I think this is the Makagonov system. Black plays now e5, and we see d5. Knight a6, trying to get that c5 square. It seems logical in this system. Bishop e3, depriving the knight, unless bishop takes c5 is desirable at some point for black. At the moment, I would assume it isn't. Queen e8, and now g4, so a very aggressive move here. And it does bind black on the king side, trying to discourage f5. Black now plays knight c5, not minding bishop takes c5 in this position. Magnus is not interested in that. He plays knight d2. So the slight difference there with the pawn committed on g4, maybe there's some weaknesses to exploit, making bishop take c5 not as attractive as before. a5 now. We see bishop e2. c6, biting at white centre. Rook g1, as though perhaps g5 is the plan here, just for a space gaining on the king side. Or, alternatively, just supporting this pawn for h4, then maybe h5 is dangerous as well. King h8, and in fact Magnus chooses this plan of h4 here. Knight g8, but with f5 seemingly discouraged. Okay, is black really going to play it? Especially after now queen c2, which also eyes f5, so prophylaxis against f5. Is Judit in quite a passive cramped position? Well, we'll see. Bishop d7. She doesn't have to commit to anything too serious just yet. There's no real pressure on d6 at the moment either, with some congestion issues here. So if white castles, is not really immediately on d6. White is castling queenside here. C takes d5, offering white a seemingly nice knight on d5. Knight takes d5 and an immediate threat of knight c7. Okay, that seems to be parried now with this next move, knight e6. Also the knight's got an opportunity for knight d4 at some point. But Magnus has these pawns which seem dangerous, and he plays now h5. And it looks as though either hg or h6 is quite dangerous in this position. This next move from Judit seems in one respect kind of worrying to play. It's g5, it hems in the bishop. It means that f5 is kind of ruled out, really locked out as a possibility. Where is black's counterplay going to come from? How is Judit going to arrange some tactical dynamism from this position? It seems white has a few positional trump cards, a huge knight on d5, a bind on f5, possibility of f5 seemingly really ruled out, potentially bad bishop. Okay, but if an opponent is tactically resourceful, you know, these things are not so superficially based. What happens here? Okay, king b1. Now bishop a4, bit of a nuisance move, provoking a bit of a weakness if b3 is played. If knight b3, maybe that's not ideal either. Maybe b5. We'll check that out in the second pass. But b3 is actually played here, kicking the bishop back. And now knight b6 attacking the rook, which moves to d8. And now the move queen c3, which looks as though Magnus is interested in just taking the a5 pawn. Perhaps he can get away with this. But now an interesting move, which looks aggressive visually, knight f4, but is it? Of course white's not obliged to take this and open up this bishop on this massive diagonal. White just slips the bishop back on f1 here. And ask the question now, what is black doing here? What about this a5 pawn? Well, Judit plays h6, which secures against white playing h6, of course, but a5 is on offer, and it is actually taken here. Is there a problem with this? Well, okay, this is what I mean now about superficial visual positions against a dynamic, aggressive, resourceful player. Can you guess what black actually played in this position now? If I give you 10 seconds starting from now. Okay, f5. It's a powerful move in the circumstances, for sure. I'm pretty sure Magnus is not keen on liberating this bishop with e takes an e4 of that bishop. And the other option, well, e4's under fire, is to take here, but then h5 is a problem. What about f3? We need to look at this in the second pass. f3 might be plausible, but then what about, say, taking on e4 and then knight f6? It would be double attacking, or putting more pressure on e4 at least. So in this position, g takes f5 is played, and now it doesn't seem that grim for black after queen takes h5. There's this entrenched knight which, okay, visually looks aggressive, but might actually be tactically useful, technically useful from a functional perspective. There's an immediate threat here as well. Queen takes d1, which needs to be handled. The rook moves to e1, and we see knight f6, pressure on e4. This is what I mean now. Black's position is not totally dead. Knight d5 is played. Okay, what's going on here? Well, knight d5 shields, of course, e4, so it seems like a useful consolidating move. And perhaps Magnus is keen, if he can get this bishop out of the way, to get a rook on the h file, possibly. But at the moment, you know, this knight's doing a fine job of defending some squares here against this bishop moving. And black also can use the a file, rook a8, queen b4, rook fd8 protecting d6, which was attacked. And we see now the move f3. Okay, and there's a really interesting weakness of the last move here created by this move f3. The weakness of the last move is a great concept, not just for 5-minute chess, but also for longer games. It's one of those scalable concepts, independent of time control. There's something very subtle about this weakness of the last move here. Very, very subtle. Basically, this diagonal has been weakened, which can lead to a forcing move, and a forcing move can create other opportunities which can be very, very useful. And we see that now. Queen h4 forcing move, asking the rook to move. Okay. But this move queen h4, it isn't just about the diagonal. It's about the row as well. It's making other moves all of a sudden much more effective, especially forcing moves. Their effectiveness has just gone up after rook c1. So I've given you a clue. There's some forcing moves available for black now, which just didn't exist at all. So from one weakness of the last move, a forcing move, and all of a sudden some other forcing moves are more effective. Can you spot what black can do here? I'll give you the first move. Bishop takes d5. So Magnus plays c takes d. And now, what does Judit play here in this position? If I give you 10 seconds starting from now. Okay. Knight 4 takes d5. How the picture has changed. Look at this pin on that pawn which has been exploited. Ouch. Black's position is going to spring into life. Oh dear. Magnus has slightly lost control of the position here. It is a rapid game. Things like this can really turn the tables. Okay. So what can Magnus do here? It is pretty bad actually, this fork. He plays bishop takes g5. And now queen takes g5 is played. So if rook takes, then black just takes and there's a piece up. And that's what happens. Rook takes, knight takes, piece up. Oh dear, these accidents do happen. From what was, seemingly a very powerful bind on f5. Whoops, and now a2's on the fire as well. Magnus plays rook g2. Of course his rook needs to move as well, so rook g2 is played. Instead of taking on a2, trying to energize the position a bit more, Judit plays d5. Okay. So after e takes d5, we get a more energetic bishop now on the diagonal. Knight f takes d5, threatening e4 potentially. That's blocked now with knight e4. But now knight e3, black's piece up with tons of piece play really. Apart from this bishop, okay, it's not ideal. And there might be a nuisance of f6, but fundamentally it seems this is now brilliant for black. f6 is played in this position. Bishop f8. Rook h2. Rook ac8 is played. Magnus was of course defending a2 like that, but rook ac8 challenging the rook. Bishop c4. Judit now takes on c4. B takes. Okay, is it going to be easy to convert this position? White has got a pawn for the piece. Kingside seems a bit dangerous. This next move might surprise you, actually. The king evacuates from over there, king g8, giving possibilities of king f7. There were potential threats like rook g1 and knight g5 to factor in, among other things, with that king on h8. So maybe the king's going to be safer, potentially on f7 if needed. Rook b2, rook c7, c5. Okay, Magnus is trying to generate some counterplay, but where is it going to come from here? Knight d3, forking both rooks, but it can be parried with rook d2, pinning that knight to the rook on d8, renewing the threat of taking the rook now, unpinning. And we see c6 here being played. B takes, rook takes c6. And then the king does come to f7. So these g-file checks were a bit worrisome. Rook b6. And now a powerful move again, knight c5. Attacking the knight and the rook. So we see an exchange of rooks. Knight f2. h5. This passed pawn has a loss to expand. Let's try and promote that passed pawn. Rook c6. Rook d2. Rook on the 7th. Always a bit dangerous, restricting the king. Knight h3, knight e6, and now even f6 can be taken with the king potentially. But also there's other juicy possibilities now. It's hopeless for white, surely. Rook h2, and Magnus does indeed resign here. Oh dear, this was the first rapid game. In the interest of fairness, I think I should show you subsequent games in this match. But this was to the surprise and delight of many spectators that Judit Polgar could defeat Magnus. Let's flip the board now and take a look from an engine point of view. In this position, this looks really hopeless, by the way. If knight g1, what would be the strongest? I would say rook h1 is strong enough. Bishop a3, bishop h6. Well, it's just a piece up for nothing really. This kind of continuation, pretty hopeless for white. So let's go back. So Magnus was doing well here, it seems, in the opening in the King's Engine. So a King's Engine defense Makhachanov system with h3. So e5, d5. I assumed that initially the knight coming to c5 was a bad idea. Actually, the engine's giving knight c5. No big deal. So what if it takes? Is this a problem? Maybe this reflects a slight weakening of the dark square. So giving up the dark square bishop like this is against the philosophy of this particular position with white. Queen d2 seems a bit toothless without that bishop, for example, for bishop h6. So maybe this isn't such a big deal. And if white doesn't want to take here, because all sorts of trouble, knight h5 here, and that's really unstable. Let's see, queen f3, check. Taking on f4, it's just unstable. So no big deal, pardon me. No big deal for taking on c5. But queen e8 was preferred here. After g4, now knight c5 was played. Knight d2. Now a5 seems logical enough to reinforce against b4. Secure that knight. Bishop e2. c6 now. It seems actually c6 did play a pivotal role in setting the scene for blowing up the centre later tactically when the queen was on h4, because that d5 does become a bit more vulnerable if one of the defenders of d5 is knocked out. So rook g1, king h8, and we saw h4. White was doing fine here for the moment, of course, with tempting possibilities of either h5 or g5, but Magnus put the clamp on more with queen c2, which doesn't look bad either, of course. Bishop d7, and white castle queenside, and the engine actually quite likes white here a little bit, more than half a pawn, so it's reasonably significant, or even more than that. C takes d5, knight takes d5, juicy knight with the threat of knight c7, knight e6, and we saw h5, and this ugly looking move g5, which condemns basically the bishop on g7. It's not the sort of move you really want to play, especially against Magnus Carlsen. It looks grim, and the engine finds it quite grim technically. We're approaching +2. How on earth did Magnus Carlsen, the top rated FIDE player in the world, lose this position, you might ask? Well, we saw it. Started really from a weakness of the last move, but okay, maybe he got a bit optimistic. It's just rapid, it's time control. It's harder to keep control of positions in rapid. As we've seen in the past, anything can really happen, even if they are strong grandmasters. It's much more random than classical chess, basically. But it seems white has such a secure grip on the position right now, a huge grip on the position, because you might think, well, with the f5 break ruled out, what has black actually got to look forward to? So we see, okay, after king b1, a nuisance forcing move. Knight b3 perhaps was possible. Let's look at knight b3 instead of b3. Is b5 actually possible to play here? Does it do anything? Probably not. Knight b6, attacking the rook and bishop. This isn't too hot. This kind of position, maybe just taking on b5 or a5, shouldn't be too much of a problem for black. I mean, for white, black seems to be in real problems. So, so anyway, b3 was played, which, all right, fine. It's one of the available moves which keeps white with a huge grip on the position. So knight b6. Okay, this keenness to win the a5 pawn is revealed now. After queen c3. Okay. The engine actually likes knight f4 as well as a4. So knight f4 was played, attacking the bishop. That's moved. And then we saw the grim looking h6 as though, well, what is black looking forward to here with h6? Intriguing. Even though f5 seems totally ruled out, with the bishop on c6 there is some pressure on e4, so f5 at least has to be paid attention to tactically. But the engine does like queen takes a5 here. It's like, okay, maybe a problem occurred later. So after f5, I think a blunder occurred later actually. Intuitively, from a human point of view though, the queen is more active on h5 than it is on e8, doing nothing. At least it's out and about when it takes on h5 here. So Magnus took with a g pawn, which might even be stronger than e takes f5. These possibilities of e4, are they actually real? Maybe they're not. You know, e4 here, okay, it activates the bishop, and it looks as though that's what black was wanting anyway for weakening the dark squares with bishop a4 earlier. But with technical precision moves, this might not be a big deal. But Magnus is not interested perhaps in that. He just takes with a g pawn, which is even stronger. Forget this diagonal, forget worrying about it. Give up the h pawn. So what if the queen's a bit active? So queen takes h5. Technically, yes, the engine really likes white here. He has to parry this threat against his rook, moves the rook. We see something strange happening here. Knight f6. Or not. The blunder. Or is it? f3 is prompted here just to support e4. In which case, why has black now got g4? And almost bringing down her disadvantage. This is what I mean. The queen is at least employed on h5. It's doing nothing on e8. So this is generating some counterplay all of a sudden from what was a seemingly virtually dead position. If this is the case, why all of a sudden has black got counterplay? If we just rewind back earlier, was there any other option apart from queen takes a5? Couldn't f3 have been played as a prophylaxis move here? a4? Really? Okay. So if b4, knight f6, isn't this better than the game? Without any f5, there's no queen which is active, so b5, couldn't white progress slowly here, taking here, without the counterplay? Just an idea anyway, but obviously it's easy in retrospect to say these things. Who would have thought that this queen would be such a nuisance now, after queen takes h5, that actually, you know, it's not just the diagonals, it's the ranks. So knight d5, and we see that, okay, that's a good move in the circumstance, better than perhaps f3 to support e4. And we see rook a8, and now here I think, okay, queen b4, not yet Howler, but it is a loose queen there, not protected by anything apart from the knight, potentially loose queen, and it does attack the d6 pawn, so rook fc8. I think here it is. Here we have Magnus's Howler of the game. Potentially loose queen because d5 can be eliminated. So this move f3, I suspect, is not so hot. Ouch. -2. Oh dear, how cruel chess is. We go from +2 virtually to -2 with one move, which provides a weakness of the last move, which provides a forcing move, which activates other forcing moves, to all of a sudden be very, very useful, like bishop d5 and knight d5. So queen h4, ouch. Judit is right up there back in this game in the driving seat now after this move queen h4. All this counterplay from a seemingly dead position is quite an achievement, I think. But okay. So rook c1, it's nasty now. Bishop takes d5 was played, which actually is not the most accurate move if we look at this. Magnus could have played here bishop takes f4. Maybe he was a bit shocked or something. If he sacks a pawn here, maybe that's much better than the game, or isn't so bad. Bishop d3. This is a very nuisance queen here. Okay, but he didn't play that. But before going on from that, in this position, white is taking on d5 a lot stronger with a knight. So say knight 6 takes d5. So if cd, we have knight takes d5 here. Very clear cut fork, queen and bishop. It's just tactically nasty all of a sudden. Ouch. So anyway, bishop takes d5, c takes, knight 4 takes d5, very powerful. Could either of knight, no, it must be this one because it unveils the horizontal attack using that pin on the pawn. So knight 4 takes d5, forking queen and bishop. Happens to the best of us. Tactics, weaknesses of the last move. Shows that even in the dead position, don't give up hope. So bishop takes g5. Black is just a piece up, basically. d5 instead of knight takes a2. Was there some cleverness there? Actually, d5 is preferred by the engine to knight takes a2. Rook takes a2. There's going to be trouble with rook c4, I would suspect. But even this position isn't so bad. There's resources for black here. Even giving up the knight here. Knight h5, this is powerful for black. But let's not get into that. Knight takes a2. Just briefly though, rook c7, rook d7. It's playable as well. Black is clean, so we don't have to research this hugely. Magnus has blown his position really. So d5 is another just activating move, activating the d file, potentially this bishop along the diagonal. Now knight f takes d5. Okay, maybe there's a few threats to deal with, but black's got her own threats now and a piece up. They have to be listened to more surely. So bishop c4, we saw knight takes c4. Most of the problems are over. If white was given an extra move, what are white's major threats out of interest? There's a new trick I picked up. For those of you Chess Place Light who are experts, I guess you know this already. But if you do right mouse click, analyze threat, there's an X. We can just click X, and I should be doing more of this soon in future videos. What would be white's threat? I know he's a piece down, so it's probably academic here. If given an extra move, knight g5 or rook g1, and then what after that? We can look at f7, and that would be dangerous for some of us because of rook g8. These possibilities. So these are all cut out by prophylactic sort of king evacuation, king g8. So that was using the X just to sort of null move it. So king g8, little trick there. So Okay, so no major threats now to worry about. No knight g5 or rook g1. Rook b2, rook c7, c5, okay, knight d3. Black's just a piece up. Magnus is playing on for a bit. It is just a rapid game. But now this knight has got a pretty bad deal out of this. Driven back to h3. Okay, knight g5 is a threat in this position which needs to be dealt with though, surely. Let's X this. If white's given knight g5, although it doesn't really help that much, it will still be grim. But knight e6 extinguishes knight g5. And now it's just all over. Okay, yeah, just amazingly, Judit Polgar took down Magnus in that first encounter in the Rapid in Mexico City from a very passive looking position. Comments or questions on YouTube? Thanks very much.